So as soon as that clock starts, that starts a penalty phase. In Texas, it's a penalty default. The penalty is 25% for 1 minute or 180 days.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is Tax Deed Sales in Texas, the 5 essential things you need to know. We have Ted Thomas here, who is the Tax Lien Certificate and Tax Deed Authority of America, and he's going to be addressing these questions that came in from you. These are the top 5 questions regarding tax deed sales in Texas. So let's get right to it, Ted. First question, Ted. First of all, how do the Texas tax deed sales work? And maybe begin by just explaining what is a tax deed sale.
All counties across the United States charge property tax. So the legislature of the state, no matter what state, says, all right, to the treasurer and the board of supervisors, you have to charge property tax, and that means you have to collect it. So when they don't collect it, then the challenge begins. And the challenge simply is for the county to send out notices of default and tell people you got to get your tax paid. If they don't pay it, then the county will take action. And if the people don't pay the tax, then they will start a process which we're going to call confiscation of the property. In other words, they're going to take the property away from the property owner. So in Texas, they're going to call this all kinds of names. They're going to call it a tax defaulted auction. They're going to call it Texas tax deed sales. So sales and auctions are kind of both the same, but people think of it differently. Sometimes they call it tax delinquent property sale lists and that kind of. So they have a lot of different names for this. But basically what it is the state of Texas is saying we are going to confiscate the property. So when they do that, they send out the notice and then they will have an auction.
I'm curious, how often do those auctions happen in Texas, Ted?
In Texas, they do it the first Tuesday of every month. So there's a lot of auctions take place. So that's quite a bit of auctions.
First Tuesday, okay. Hey, our next question, Ted, it comes from George. He was on Instagram. He wants to know, how much can you earn in Texas at a tax deed auction? Is the rate annualized?
Well, Texas doesn't have an annualized rate. That's pretty much for the states that use an interest rate where they're going to say the interest rate is annualized over the year and they will amortize it over the months of the year. In Texas, it's a penalty return. So that simply means that when the person goes to the auction, they will actually sell a property. That starts a clock ticking. Like, think of the clock on 60 Minutes. It starts going tick, tick, tick like that. So as soon as that clock starts, that starts a penalty phase. In Texas, it's a penalty default. The penalty is 25% for 1 minute or 180 days. So anytime that the property owner comes in and wants to redeem the property, get their property back, they have to pay exactly what the person paid and 25%. So 25% is what you would earn in Texas.
That sounds pretty good, and I'm sure that's why a lot of people are interested in Texas, Ted. You know, a question that came in from a lot of people was, how can I find information about upcoming tax deed sales in Texas?
Okay, well, go and look for Texas tax deed sales or Texas defaulted properties and look on the county website, and that's where you'll find those, and they'll be in the local newspapers.
Hey, another question that comes in, again, from a lot of people, and I know Bill from Facebook was one of them. What kind of due diligence should you do before purchasing property at the Texas deed auction?
Texas is a big, wide open state, although it's the second most populous state in the United States. There's a lot of people there, too. However, there's a lot of open land. So let's say you were bidding on a property that was going to be open land. Well, you want to think about that. Does it have water? Have you thought about how it's surveyed? You know, if you're driving a car, you can't tell where the land stops and starts. So you need a survey. Would you want to know if it had power? Okay. Would you want to know if it had drainage? I mean, you're going to have to start doing that. That would be due diligence on some land. Now, I just gave you a few things. What if it was a property? Well, if it was a property, you'd want to go and see if there was a structure there. It hadn't burned down, hadn't been a windstorm, it hadn't been a hurricane. All right, so you want to check on that. You'd also want to check on the neighborhood. So you'd look around the neighborhood and say, oh, this is a nice neighborhood. It's a bad neighborhood. You don't want to get a bad neighborhood. People aren't going to come and buy bad stuff from you. And so you have to do a lot of due diligence. Now, I can spend the next hour and a half talking about due diligence, but I can summarize it this way by saying, don't buy what you haven't walked on. If you haven't seen the property, don't buy it.
Hey, Ted, I'm curious, what about like any liens or encumbrances that may be attached to the property? Does that ever happen on property that's sold at a tax deed auction?
Really good question. You better find out what liens or encumbrances are on that property. Now, in many cases, on a tax defaulted property, there's going to be things happen to the deed of trust. Sometimes it's going to be wiped out. Sometimes it's going to stay in place. But I can tell you what will always stay in place. Municipal liens stay in place. Federal liens stay in place. You better go check and make sure they're on there, because if you buy it, you will get a municipal lien and you will get the federal lien. So you want to check. A lot of people won't buy a property if it had a federal lien on it, like an IRS lien. A lot of people won't buy it if it has an IRS lien on it.
Well, Ted, the fifth question that everybody seemed to write about is they want to know, can you explain the redemption period for Texas tax deeds, and what happens if the owner never comes in? What will be the next step after that?
So the redemption law in Texas is not complex. They simply say in the Texas rules and the Texas statute that property owner can come back and redeem that property anytime for 180 days. However, if the 180 days gets there, well, then that's over. They can't redeem after that. And now the new property owner takes over, and that was the bidder.
Well, I'll tell you, let's sum up the 5 essential things you need to know. Now, the first one is you have to understand tax deed sales. And if you're watching this video, you probably do. If you're fuzzy on it, just go back to the beginning of the video where Ted explains exactly how tax deed sales works. Number 2, tax deed sales in Texas, they can be a lucrative opportunity. Ted, I think you said 25% is what you can earn on something like that, and that's pretty darn good. In terms of where do I find the list, Ted mentioned you can always go to the, just Google the local office there. Number 4, you definitely want to research the properties before you bid. As Ted said, get on the ground, take a look around, make sure the property's there, make sure of a lot of things, check those liens. And of course, number 5, the redemption period. It's 180 days in Texas. If you guys have any more questions, leave it. You might be in another video, but right now we talked about some other ways that you can find out about their auctions in Texas. Ted, what's another way that you offer to do it that's pretty neat?
All right. Well, everyone has to understand that we're involved with a business of abundance. Now, it's not just Texas. California has a lot. Washington State, Florida, New York. I mean, we can go Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma. We can go through all these states. There's going to be way too much tax defaulted. All right. By that, I mean 2,000, 3,000 tax defaulted property and literally millions of tax liens. So it's a business of abundance. How are you going to know all that? Well, what you can do is you can call the county and ask them to send you a newspaper about it. Can you imagine getting 3,000 counties sending you 3,000 newspapers? You'd fill your house up. So when we started, we would go one auction at a time. Now, because of the internet, you can do multiple things, especially if you have what I'm going to tell you about right now. So I created an auction calendar. And you can actually go to that. It's going to be right below me, and they're going to show you a demo of it. You can go from county to county. You can find out how many properties are going to come up for auction, and then you can actually get into the county records. So you can know about every single auction that's taking place in the United States electronically just by going to the calendar that's below me.
Thanks a lot, Ted, and thanks a lot for watching, everybody.